another state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.
Welcome to the Black Myths Podcast. Welcome to the Black Myths Podcast. I'm your host, Too Black. All right, so this is our end of the year episode, the Black Myths in Review. So originally this was only supposed to all be one episode, but we talked for way too long. So we chopped it into two. So we went over in detail two prior myths from 2021 in the first episode. So we talked about the myth being that Black Wall Street is self-sustaining. And we talked about the myth of trickle-down blackness. So those were the first two we discussed. And then we did a rundown of our overall myths. And then today we're discussing, or in this episode, we're discussing algorithms are colorblind, again, that being the myth. And then the myth that Angela Davis was a Black Panther. So again, these are episodes we've already done if you haven't heard them, so please go check them out. But we're reflecting and just giving a kind of a review of those episodes and our feelings of what we learned from it and so on and so forth. So we'll be back next month with a new myth. We have not missed a month in almost 2 years, and we hope to maintain that. So we appreciate everybody that supported us, and I hope you enjoy this show. So one that was, we talked about this earlier, this was the least listened to, least downloaded episode from the whole year within our like cadre of like true episodes, not the bonus ones. And it was the myth was algorithms are colorblind. Terrell chose this one. So again, I'm just gonna get a quick outline of it. But this one is pretty. I mean, this myth is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, I think the general idea is that algorithms somehow are just neutral. Like Ryan was talking about, our skin is actually neutral. Like we get taught that the algorithms are neutral. Like so when you see what you see on your screen, it's just natural. Or when the ads that you see online are just natural. Or the tests they use to say who's more prone to violence are just natural. Like, but it's like, no, these things are programmed. You know, like there's something that's put into these things that produces a particular outcome because algorithms are just the logic of human beings. And then we also talked about colorblind in and of itself doesn't really describe what's happening. Like colorblind is an ableist term because it just puts race on sight or places the emphasis on the sense of seeing. And it's like race is more than just seeing, like, or racism is more than just seeing. So somebody we played a clip of a blind guy on that show, I don't know if y'all remember, who was talking about when he hears people speaking vulgarly, you know, he thinks that that lets him know that it's Black people, if they have a particular accent, you know, that's what he said, that lets him know it's Black people. So we talked about being color evasive or color shook, because usually people who are evasive to the idea of what race means, it's not that they can't see it. You know, they don't want anything to do with it at all. They don't want any of their senses to tap into it. So I'm gonna play a clip from Terrell, and I'm gonna let Terrell expand on this episode.
Facebook's business model, or how they make money, is targeted ads, right? So you look up a watch on Google, look up a watch on you search in marketplaces for whatever you're looking for. Then next you see ads for it and stuff like that. We get it. They're targeting you for that. So here's where Facebook allowed advertisers to use racial prejudices within these ads to filter these ads, basically. So yeah, companies were basically allowed to pick and choose who they wanted to advertise to, and these filters would advertise to people who were most likely to buy those products or who they wanted to buy those products or services. So for example, like say say I got a new housing complex or whatever, since we were talking about redlining earlier. Say I got a new housing complex and I want to advertise it everywhere. I'm putting it on Facebook, Google, anywhere. But specifically on Facebook and social media, I don't want niggas living here. Right. So within those algorithms, they actually had the choice to what was it? Basically pick and choose who they wanted. They were able to filter out groups by their ethnic affinity.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I remember that part.
So
yeah.
ethnic affinity, which basically, i.e., color folks, and whites being the default.
Right, and there was no, if I remember that story correctly, there was no option to do that to white people.
No, white people were
you couldn't be like, I want to just, you could say I don't want to target niggas, but you couldn't say I don't want to target white people. There was no category for that, correct?
Right. And that goes back to your point. In capitalism, white people will eat their own.
Yeah.
We both were a little tipsy on that episode because honestly, you got when you get into this shit and you start reading and really researching this stuff, you like, fuck, I need a shot or something.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I don't know how Black does it some nights, but like I'll be researching and looking into this and I get so mad or so frustrated and or just be like, doors are opening, windows are opening, and the information is coming in. I'm like, fuck this shit. Fuck capitalism. Fuck America. Fuck all of it. Cause it's a dirty fucking game.
It is a dirty fucking game. Definitely.
And with that being said, I'm taking my last shot for tonight because we're gonna say Ryan.
Yes. Hello, Jeff Bezos. This is your old friend Ryan. From the last episode. I just want to tell you from the bottom of my heart to go fuck yourself. Thank you.
No Vaseline.
Anybody who watches the episode will know what that ties into. But yeah, that episode, as my colleague Terrell just said, opened up a lot of doors to understanding how algorithms can be worked racially, right?
Yeah.
How it can be used, and all this information gets stored and used against you. And then we talked a lot about even from facial recognitions to how Amazon start tracking their workers to where so closely to where if you deviate from the path or whatever, then you get essentially get punished, you get reprimanded, and all based off of algorithm. And to see that and to read about that, it was infuriating. And that's why you get a lot of the way we were in that episode. We were just, because we've all experienced that. We're all millennials. We were all worked jobs similar to where we had to deal with that type of I guess scrutiny, right? Deal with that level of people being over our heads and tracking this and tracking that, where you kind of lose the human aspect of a job, right?
Yeah.
You expect you to be a computer, expect you to be a robot. And so yeah, that's where you get a lot of anger, a lot of vitriol in that episode.
I think one of the things that pissed me off the most about it was, like, in the title we said we put the myth is algorithms are colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
But they're literally like, okay, so Black, do me a favor, just define algorithm for me real quick.
Which brings us to this myth. What is an algorithm? Let's define it as a set of instructions that process available data for a particular outcome. Yeah.
All right. So a set of instructions that, So if you know anything about computer programming or anything like that, you literally have to put those instructions in. So to say that they're colorblind is to say that the person putting those instructions in, they're not racist. They can't be racist.
Right.
And then even with the algorithm, we don't know who's creating these algorithms. We don't know who's who's implementing them, putting them in place. We don't know none of that. So to say that algorithms are not colorblind, that's just to say that, white people, like, you could use, because algorithms aren't colorblind. Oh, white people are not racist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or people don't carry.
People in general don't have judgments of other people
Nah, just
on their
the
color.
computer is somehow, or the algorithm is somehow able to remove that. And again, an algorithm, I think, like I was joking at the beginning, people thought we were going to talk about math, but like everybody operates off algorithms. It's just a lot of their algorithms suck. But I'm just saying, like, just like remember, Cam, when we were talking about methodology and how everybody has a methodology, and methodologies are simple, but people make it seem like it's complex. But it's like if you don't have enough sugar for your cake, you have a method of going to buy sugar at the store. You get in a car, you drive there, you go to this aisle, you pay for it. That's a method. But people think it's like some smart thing, right? Or some deep thing. It's like, no, that's a method. So algorithm,
how you choose to do this.
yeah, an algorithm is just your process basically. And it's like what information and what filtering system do you have in your brain?
Yeah,
That yeah,
it's literally like I create this, you compute like I put this information in, you compute this, here's the outcome.
yeah.
It's also
Say that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Cam.
no, sorry. It also just deduces it to the thought that algorithms are only for utilized for things that are negative. And it's like there are so many ways in which we talk about, things that are targeted that we're like, oh, I didn't know that. I needed this. If I sit here and I say too loudly with my iPhone near me, thinking about grad school and getting a doctorate degree, by tomorrow I'm gonna have a shit ton of ads for fucking universities all up and down my phone. That will most likely also have a fucking diversity cover on it because they know I'm a Black person and want me to go there. And so, and who's to say that one eventually after the 900th time, I might not click a link and actually go think about it, which could be a good thing. And if I only celebrate that and be like, wow, that's really cool. And I don't also think and understand that the same people who have made these to, in some way, shape, or form, benefit you are not also going to be very intentional about the ways in which they're going to utilize algorithms for our demise.
Yeah, and it's like, go ahead, Terrell.
No, I was gonna say just because I wrote this shit out and I don't write nothing. I wrote this shit out like we're talking about average. I'm reading like I saved the notes that I wrote for it. Advertisers were able to filter out groups of people by their ethnic affinity, i.e., color folks, with white folks being the default. For example, I have new homes insurance or services, but I only want white people to see these ads. And like I said in the clip, like Facebook got in trouble for that.
There was a point where you said, I wish I thought I had that, man. I swear I must have wrote down the right time codes, but you said something like, you said, it's as if white people are the only ones seeing white only signs or something like that. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, no, that's when we got into the subject of digital redlining.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if I'm the first person to say that, coined it. No, but that's to the point of digital redlining. Like these algorithms can literally code and advertise to certain people. Like in the episode I talked about, like if I want to advertise my new homes or my new insurance, especially insurance, because I do that a lot in my professional career. So especially insurance, if I only want to advertise to a certain demographic and I have that option through Facebook, that's a problem. Like that's not cool. Cause like I can literally say like there was in that episode we talked about an article where two people basically same driving history, same driving record or whatever, same financial means, all that. They just lived in two different zip codes, but they were getting charged two different prices because one zip code there's a higher, crime rate or whatever.
For that episode, we used what was called it was I don't know if a study would be, basically like an online pamphlet. That's what I would call it. I don't know what they called it exactly. I guess a report would be a fair assessment of it. It was called data capitalism. Was done by data for Black Lives, and so a lot of what we pulled from was in their work, and they start with how data collecting begins at the inception of capitalism, and one of the greatest ways of studying data collecting on your laborers was studying slaves, and the activity of slaves and how to monitor slaves and what works for a workforce and what doesn't. And there was something I remember saying in that episode where the actual it was harder for capitalists to track white folks at factories because they had such higher turnover rates, but because slaves were perpetual slaves, right, they generations through, and they were always going to be at work, that's where they got some of the most fine-tuned like ways of studying data. So tracking, right, like we talked about with Amazon, and understanding like how to motivate a population, like Cameron talked about how if you gave slaves a sense of community, that actually encouraged them to work more. And then that's when Terrell starts talking about how, even when you go to a job today, they start talking about this sense of family or whatever, or how because they let slaves get married and such and such. Yeah. So it's like
I remember that because I was really confused on, they're slaves.
Yeah,
they're slaves. Yeah. Why do you give a fuck if they're married, or if they have church, or if they have, different what's the word I'm looking for?
Relations.
Just different.
Yeah, just familiar relations.
Different, different stuff like that. Why do you give a fuck? And we broke it down, and I was like, okay, I get that now.
Yeah, I remember that conversation in the episode.
It's a strategy of control.
One of the first salaried employees was overseers at plantations. Like that's how fine-tuned the shit was. Wow. Overseers at plantations were some of the first salaried employees. I cannot remember. It was a book about accounting and slavery. I can't remember the exact name of that book, but it was in that book. But go ahead, Cameron.
I was gonna talk about accounting and slavery actually because
we on the same
because it's so interesting that like when people want to believe that algorithms are colorblind when but when methodology and data collection have been utilized forever. Like when we talk about when we were talking about the ways in which various slave owners took data and utilized it as a part of their methods of maintaining their plantations. Thinking about like the accounting book talked about like some of the detail, literally. When some folks were particular about what tribes that they would be that they wanted to buy slaves from to enslave us further, specifically because they had documents that showcased that they were stronger, harder workers. They're when we talk about there were no benefits to slavery, but when we talk about this understanding that a sense of community would increase increase the folks' desire to work, or there was data on whether or not keeping families together was more beneficial or not. Like people weren't just separating babies for no reason. There was data to prove that you would be less likely to run away if you had something here. Or there were huge documents that were completely disturbing and disgusting about the ways in which they were intentional rapes, where there were specific people who were forced because they knew that this person on paper has given 8 kids already. I'm going to continue to force these specific kinds of men to produce with her in order to get this type of child. And so we knew that was happening then, and there are documents on documents on documents to prove it.
No,
on earth would we think that when folks can go into a digital age, we wouldn't be targeted in a lot of the same methods.
Yeah.
No, what's crazy to your point, Cam. So people in the comments, please don't judge me. I took it was a long, I'm talking about years before I watched 12 Years as a Slave.
Nobody's gonna judge you for that.
Oh.
like nobody's gonna like I love judging you, right? But I'm not even gonna judge you for that. Like so.
Well, because I got a thing with these black trauma films. Like sometimes I just don't want to see it. Like I just don't want to.
And they're usually not that good of movies either. There's that part.
That too. But they made a good point in that movie. Very small, because they could have. I wish they would. When I saw that film, when I finally watched it and I saw that scene, I was like, oh my god, bro, y'all not even touching the surface. This is what's going on. There was a scene where they're literally collecting data on how much cotton this person picked or that person picked, and they did it to discipline them, like, you didn't pick enough cotton, you didn't do this, you didn't meet your quota for what you did last week. What I mean? And there was the one thing, like, she picked more than anybody else and all that shit. And I'm like, that's literally what they do at Amazon, FedEx, UPS, USPS. Like, me and Black can attest to the Amazon situation.
Yeah.
literal trackers.
Yeah, I mean, even if your body, Cameron said this on the original episode, but even if your body like moves, because I was explaining to people on the original one about how we used to get around that, right? Like, we just walked around the factory or the warehouse, even if we wasn't doing shit, because we knew if we sat still, that they would be like, you're not working. All right, so we would just walk around in circles. Then they caught on to that, right? They would catch on that people were walking around in circles. So we started we would just do shit just to get away with it. But like tracking is very much like
I got in trouble because we were actually slow. Like, there were no orders. Like, we were slow.
Mm-hmm. And that's when it's the worst. Yeah.
I got in trouble. It was like you weren't productive between this and I was like, bro, there was nothing to do.
It's not a box to move.
There's nothing.
It's crazy to think that, like, when you can just do it in a more covert way, like utilizing the internet, where you don't know how this all works on the back end, that folks would think that they would magically not want to make sure that they can do this in a way that benefits white, racist, capitalistic society, that they were just going to be like, no, actually, let's put some equality in there.
Yeah, let's just mix it in.
And anybody who's had a call center job knows they track everything.
Everything.
Length of your calls, what time you do your calls, your breaks.
Don't get me started, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again,
and like we never end.
Yeah, and like we talked about in the original episode, we're not saying that this is the exact same thing as slavery. Like, that's more so, prisons and shit. But like, we're not saying this is the exact same thing as slavery. And even prisons aren't the exact same thing as what chattel slavery was. But I'm just saying, like, but capitalism is built on this, and slavery was just a large part of capitalism, particularly in this part of the hemisphere. So it's just like that's and those methods can get moved around. Like, but technology is not just computers. Like, technology was a cotton gin, right? Like, technology is always whatever can produce more money at less rates, or at a lower cost, I should say, is always what they're looking for. Like, that's what capitalists are looking to do. Now they've gotten to a point where they've fucked up so much of the world that now they don't even care necessarily if they make profit. They just want to control the entire markets of things. But that's another discussion. But I'm just saying, like, that's the situation that we're talking about, and just seeing, like, how this is all just an extension of that. No matter where you work, or even in some cases what color you are, you're still going to have to experience this. Maybe not as much as the people that look like us, but if white folks work at call centers, white folks work at Walmart and Amazon too, and they gotta break their backs and everything else. So I'm saying everybody really has a benefit except for the people at the top in addressing this. But there's many things that divide folks from wanting to deal with that. So,
and that's why we said fuck Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, and everybody else in that class, because it's like Jeff Bezos should never be seen kind of like how we look at Trump, like he's just one bad guy or whatever. Like, no, anybody that has over $150 billion, it should be robbed. Like, I don't know what else there is to say.
The thing with him specifically, like, Ryan said it, I think, on that episode. Like, what was it? he said that like
He thinks
quoted,
people are lazy.
Yeah.
like,
He
people are
thinks
inherently lazy, and I'm
Yeah.
like, no. If that was a thing, then we wouldn't have these like super ambitious people. We wouldn't have the burst of black women doing what they're doing today.
I think
Or
anybody
even
who
if
says that poor people are
the-
inherently lazy don't fucking know anyone who's poor. And
exactly.
that's
So
that.
Bro,
Because
if we were
niggas
inherent,
who are poor are literally going to do whatever it takes
Mhm.
to make sure that
bro, you wouldn't.
and if poor people were inherently lazy, your business would not exist. You fucking dumbass.
because who the fuck built it?
That's really all that needs to be said.
No,
Exactly.
From a street standpoint, if people, especially black people, if we're inherently lazy, how do we get the drugs that you say we abuse and all this and all that?
Yeah,
That's
I mean, if you think about a dope fiend, you wake up with no money.
Get out of my head.
They
I
said
literally
on-
was
they
like,
said,
niggas
like-
have never seen a crackhead scrape together everything they can. For
bro.
Like you wake up with no money, and every day or most days you figure out a way to scratch your itch, and you just
Bro,
do
I'm
this.
They're some of the most
I've literally
ambitious
woken up-
people.
Like
I've
Dope
literally
fiends are
woken
some of
up
the most
with, like-
ambitious motherfuckers.
I've literally woken up with like
We're praising
$2
crackheads right now. I can't.
$2 in my bank. Like,
you can make an argument that people are not organized to deal with this, but you cannot say that that is equivalent to being lazy. And I think often when we're like, man, we don't do, like, people are working hard on all kinds of shit. Now, whether you think what they're working hard on is worthwhile, that's a different discussion. But that doesn't mean they're lazy. It just means
these
that they,
people are working hard on. These people are working hard on survival.
yeah, people are working hard doing all kinds of stuff. So when they want to get home after all of that and watch Netflix or whatever, that don't make them lazy. You know, there's just, again, it's a matter of organization. Like if you're organizing in a particular fashion, then yeah, you can combine that together and actually get more power. And that's what the working class, particularly, you know, that's what people need to be doing. But you can't say that they're lazy. Like I'm saying,
And that also just dismisses the fact that there are entire systems that have been created, maintained, established, and maintained to prevent folks from even getting to where you are. There's a reason why only so many people can make it into the top 1%. It's not the 99, it is the 1% for a reason.
Say that shit. Say that shit.
And yeah,
and we talked about but we talked about surplus value, like we were talking about Marx a little bit in that episode. We were talking, and it's just real basic understanding of just how, like, if you make something, the value is in what you made. In order to make more money, you have to pay people less than the value of what they're doing to make money. That's the concept of a wage. This is worth this much money. I need to sell it for more. So the only way I can do that is to pay you less than what it's worth, right? Like that's just the way. So it's like, that's how I make a profit. I cannot sell this for the same price that I put into it. That's inherently against the concept of capitalism. So it's always going to lead to, we talked about dialectical thing where it's like one side, there's going to be a surplus. That's how you end up with a mansion, and then somebody else doesn't have a home. Like, it's just how, that's just how it works. Like, somebody else owns 50,000 acres. Someone else has a 2-square apartment, right? Like, that's the situation that you're in because that's the inequality that it inherently produces. Right now, you know, we can argue about that with economists or whatever, but I'm just saying that at its base, that's what surplus value is. That's how all of this shit has been built. Like, particularly slavery, where you're not even paying people, you're only paying to maintain them on your plantation, right? So anyway,
to basically to wrap up, you know, my segment of it, as far as algorithms are being colorblind, no. I feel like we've, in that episode and even just hearing this light conversation of it, we've debunked that. It's not, no. Algorithms are a product of what the people, the elite, or whoever you want to say, capitalism or capitalist, put in to get a certain product out.
Me and Cameron did a part 2. We talked about digital colonialism and talked about how companies that are in the U.S. now can go in other countries and collect all their information and hold their information on their servers. So it's literally like the companies can control the data collection in another country, then that's just an extension of colonialism. So check that one out too, beyond just part one, because I think we even broadened it further. Moving on to the last myth, Ryan selected Angela Davis was a Black Panther part 2. Again, we talked about part 1. I mean, this is very simple, just to give a basic premise of it. Like, Angela Davis was not a Black Panther. She's never actually claimed to be one. There's times where it seems like she might be letting people call her one without correcting them, but there's never been anything I've seen that she's like actually said that I'm a Black Panther. That got associated with I don't really know quite how people confuse that, but she was a part of, just to give the quick history, of a group that was called the Black Panther political party in Los Angeles around the years of the late 60s. And they were not the same as the Black Panther Party for self-defense. So maybe that's where people are making the confusion. That Black Panther political party eventually becomes the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of the West Coast. That group eventually falls apart for a variety of reasons that we go into in the episode. And then she becomes a part of the Communist Party, particularly the Che Lumumba Club in the West Coast. And this is in the LA area. And then when she was in that party, she worked with Black Panthers. And that's the extent of the affiliation that Angela Davis ever had. Our point of highlighting this was because Black history gets collapsed into just aesthetics, and knowing what people were about, what their ideologies were, what causes they were fighting for is an important distinction to understand if you're trying to fight against the enemy. So there's that. So I'm going to play a clip from Dr. James in episode that me and Ryan were on, where we talked to her, and she had written a piece, Dr. Joy James, she had written a piece called Airbrushing Revolution, and she was critical.
For the sake of abolition.
For the sake of, just say it. Go ahead, say it.
Yeah, airbrushing revolution for the sake of abolition.
Yeah. So like she was critical of she was critical of Dr. Davis, because Angela Davis does have a PhD. She was critical of Angela Davis and as well. So we brought her into part 2 to talk about it. But part 1 was just simply a history. So part 2 was that. So this is a clip that goes way beyond anything about Angela Davis. This is actually towards the end of the episode. I'd asked her about this idea of pragmatism, and she broke it down. So I'm gonna just
glad you chose this clip too.
So I'm gonna just let this play.
Here's the deal. This is my understanding of us as a people. If we were pragmatic, we'd probably all be dead, or most of us be dead, right? If we were pragmatic, we would never have a rebellion.
Right.
If we were pragmatic, I mean, you could say, well, pragmatic is 200,000 of us fight in the Civil War, but we were fighting before then, and then they reneged on us. I mean, the only reason this looks somewhat like a democracy is because we were never pragmatic. Right. We made demands when they said they would kill us, and not just kill us, kill our entire families, and sometimes they did that, right? Lynching is always a collective phenomenon. So if we were pragmatic, we wouldn't have any civil rights. So I'm saying, like, just keep it real. You think the practical is what got us this far? No, it's the imaginative, it's the risk-taking, it's the culture. There's nobody we admire who's pragmatic. Malcolm, I've said this before, Malcolm could have kept the money or taken it. He didn't. Stayed alive. Martin could have just gotten a little quiet church somewhere. And everybody could have been, quote, pragmatic. But if they were, we would not have any ancestors. What does it mean to be a people with no ancestors? You don't exist. Nobody loved you enough to do something impractical so that you wouldn't have to walk through a killing field. And I would rather take the love than the pragmatism.
I am the daughter of freedom fighters and farmers, bootleggers and...
This episode just resonated a lot with me because the conversation between us and Dr. Joy James was just sobering, it was refreshing, and it felt validating at the same time because the subject matter that we cover a lot on this podcast, it radically cuts against the grain so much that sometimes you feel like, at least for me, I feel like I'm isolated in my thoughts and my opinions a lot of times. But to have like Joy James affirm those ideas by saying certain things like our revolutionaries are not crazy, right? It makes you feel vindicated. Plus, there's no secret. I mean, we're a podcast full of 4 Black radical / leftists, and our positions are not popular. So we have Dr. Joy James to skillfully and poetically just break down why the Black bourgeoisie and Black academia is compromised, why it's important to understand the difference between the Black Panther political party and the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and why we shouldn't deify our figures in history because they're human and they make mistakes just like anyone else. But the main point, one of the most important points I think she makes is you can't have an authentic revolutionary who's also an academic, because academia is compromised.
That to that point about the a revolutionary or academic, I don't know if she was. I guess we were both there, so we can kind of converse on this. I don't know if she was saying nobody could be that, because I think there are like rare examples. I think she's saying
she does make rare.
There is rare, because I'm saying there are Walter Rodney who actually was assassinated and he was an academic, right? Like, so I'm saying,
Okay.
there are examples where that can happen. But I think to your point, in general, she's saying that you're a compromise. She kept saying that in the episode, that you're compromised, and therefore that possibility is rare. And
you're right.
Because
you're right. I stand corrected.
Yeah,
you're compromised, right? Those moments are very rare because you're kind of limited on what you can say, the ideas that you can express. And she also reiterates that same point in Airbrushing and Revolution, where it says elite academics are not a revolutionary cadre.
No, they're not.
Yeah. They are rarely personally known revolutionaries unless they're former political prisoners. On the ground activists work with considerable risk and no wealth. And she was just breaking a lot of stuff down in that episode.
She was talking, there was one part, it was actually in the when she was talking about George Jackson, and it's some of what in that clip that y'all just heard. And she says, we were seeking to rebirth the world. There was no way for us to be free unless the entire world changed. And she was saying how it went from that to it just being a particular class that got benefits, like we talked about at the beginning of the show. Or she says she's always really clear on war. She says, I think people mystify war because maybe they don't want to engage with revolutionary thought or struggle. Exactly. She said, what becomes really scary then is not the violence because it's normative. It's the political violence that seeks to counter the state. That's what freaks everybody out. Exactly. So the violence we were talking about, like Tulsa or anything of that nature, that's just normal. Or the police, that's just normal. But when someone actually says, I'm going to go kill a cop too, or like in the case of Tulsa, we're going to go downtown with guns to protect a black man who y'all want to lynch, then everybody freaks out. It reminds me of the Joker. Everybody loses their minds, because it doesn't go, it's not part of the thing.
Right, it's not part of the thing.
What are some of the pitfalls of like black iconography or black heroes? Like we talked about Angela Davis as being beyond whoever she is or isn't. Like, she becomes an image of something else. Like, what are some of the pitfalls of that?
You're in risk that the persona becomes more prominent in the narrative than the actual facts of what happened. You saw that with our Black Wall Street episode, right? The aura, whatever, anything that encompasses Black Wall Street becomes more popular. It's in all these ideas that are not even based in reality start to become the dominant thing that you talk about, right?
Yeah.
So when you start to deify people, you take away that human aspect, and you don't realize that they're just a person just like you that make mistakes. They're prone to all the spectrum of human emotions that we all have, and you don't want to give anybody a messiah complex. Like, nobody is that, but you can find the same type of confidence and the same type of just knowing that they're a person just like you, that you can also make a difference. You can also step into those shoes. Now there's sacrifices that will have to be made. That's just the name of the game. I mean, I think Huey Newton said, like, if you're a revolutionary, you're a doomed man. You're going to have to come to terms with those realities. And that's one thing that Joy James makes a point in that episode. She says, you know, you're not dealing with the mundane. We don't deal with the mundane on this podcast. We deal with the terrifying.
Yeah, she said we're not making carrot cakes.
No, we're not talking about recipe for carrot cakes.
Yeah.
We know what's behind that corridor. And that part was the most prophetic and most chilling to me, because it is what it is. You know, you have to deal with that.
No, I think a part of it was the same thing you said. When we think about the pitfalls, so often it is that we put the person on the pedestal and not what they stood for. And by putting the person up there, so often, you know, the humanity is lost. We see them as incapable of having any issues. And if we do, then all of a sudden, like, the whole of the work that they did just goes out of the window. Or we forget, and everyone assumes that it is just a singular person who did all these things, and not the actual movement itself, not the groundwork that was happening, not the work that was happening on the ground. It's not the organizations as a whole. It is just a leader or a group of leaders. I think even, you know, and the easy examples of that are like when we talk about MLK or Malcolm. I think less with Malcolm, because people understand the Nation of Islam, but a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, Malcolm Martin did all of these things, and it's like, yes, him and a plethora of organizations who really put in work day in and day out to ensure that it would happen. You know, he wasn't boycotting by himself. And I think so often that is such a huge pitfall that we have. Or if an org is flawed, so often, like when people talk about the Black Panther Party, it quickly loses the bulk of the work in conversation. And it's always just about how it came and it left and it fell apart, but not really sitting through and acknowledging just the gravity of everything, the full body of work that took place.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. I mean, I went on the original episode, the part one, we talked about how the Black militant vibes, you know, and people. And we say Black history is not just a vibe to us, you know, but often that's what it gets watered down to. So if it's just a vibe, there doesn't need to be any real accuracy. Like, a vibe just needs to be in proximity to something. I don't even know what half the time. And as long as it's in proximity, I mean, even when you think about how people just like talk about vibes, like a playlist doesn't have to be the exact genre the whole time. It just needs to be in the vicinity of whatever that vibe is. So if it's like a R&B playlist, it needs to kind of be R&B. If it's a workout, you know, and it's just a vibe. But like when we talk about history and how things actually play out, like, you can't do that. Like, you know, like, you can't treat things that way. So
one, because even like you said with history and everything, you can't water it down to just being a vibe, because these are real things that are happening. Like, these are people that are taking action or suffering repercussions of their actions. So it's not just a vibe. It's not just a feeling that you have in a moment. Like, this is reality.
Yeah. And I think people oftentimes also, another pitfall is thinking that we can just replicate what another group has done in the past. And that's not how that works. You know, obviously the same way that we are able to learn from them in order to grow, white folks in opposition have also learned what they can do to put more structures in place and more to prevent us from being able to actually replicate that. And so it's a combination of needing to understand, like, learn from, also learn what we can do to push forward. We talk about this all the time when we were slandering the way protest has happened, and that's a whole nother hour conversation that we can have.
Yeah. But I do think it's something everybody said, or I think Cameron said, as far as being part of something more, that those things, like we said, are not perfect either. But it's just like, there's no way Angela Davis is free from the actual things she was accused of, which we talk about in that episode as well, being involved with Jonathan Jackson, George Jackson's brother, going into the courtroom to break people out, take a judge hostage so he can get his brother out of prison, which is something that none of us would ever consider. Angela Davis being accused of being a part of that does not even get free if it's not for a collective struggle, if it's not for the Communist Party, if it's not for Black people struggling as well. And I think Dr. James makes a good distinction when she lines up George Jackson and Angela Davis. I think that's when you get to see where, yeah, there are levels to sacrifice. There are levels to this shit, right? And I think that's what she really breaks down. Like, Angela Davis took some risks, but what George Jackson was willing to do, and what Jonathan Jackson actually did, and how she said these are people who were churned out in terror. Like, they were, particularly George Jackson is in prison. Jonathan Jackson's watching his brother in prison. Like, George Jackson is in a prison where they're putting glass into people's food. They're putting fecal matter in their food. They're assassinating their comrades in prison. Like, this is not something that most academics are ever going to have to deal with on that level. So even if they're a threat to the state, even if they are taking a radical stand, so what someone like George Jackson went through was different. But that's what she was saying, how those are the people that push us, right? Those are the people that but they often scare us because they destabilize the structures that we're tied to. They say, let's just go do it. It's fucked up. It is what it is. But when you're in the side of prison, I think we said this in the episode, like, there is no, all of the illusions that we get on the outside, a lot of that disappears. Like, I'm behind bars. You know what I'm saying? Like that. So it's just clearer to me what I'm up against versus if I have a job or I have some little privilege here and there, like, I may not be willing to risk those things. And I think last point when she talks about the captive maternal, I just think it's a great point because she talks about it in those 4 stages and just how, like, the captive maternal is us trying to break out of a society but also trying to stabilize ourselves at the same time, and how that creates a contradiction. And those contradictions compromise you. And when the less those contradictions are, or the more you're willing to confront those contradictions, which usually people at the bottom are more willing to do that because they're very bare bones clear to them. That does set a different, that does give you a sense of what the stakes really are. And Angela Davis dipped into that and got to see, like, okay, this is deep. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But
yeah, even when Dr. Joy James compared the two, Angela Davis and George Jackson, both being intellectuals, but one birthed in a world of terror. Mm-hmm. You're literally in prison, but you're learning. You're self-taught. He had like 99 books or 100 books in his cell, and his thinking was without boundaries, even though he is bound. While Angela Davis, she talked about her being tied to the Che Lumumba Club or her being tied to academia. Toni Morrison is the editor, the Communist Party. Those are structures. I mean, while, like you said, she might have adopted some radical stances, right? But it's going to be nothing compared to somebody like a George Jackson, who's literally developing his thought. He's literally developing his political philosophies in the pits of hell.
Yeah, and that's just different. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with George Jackson or you don't have to agree with George Jackson. It doesn't mean either one. It just means, like, that is different. And I do think sometimes when people want to romanticize themselves, I think that's the lesson I really got from that episode is, like, people want to romanticize themselves and what they're doing or whether it's revolutionary, but you really look at, like, the material conditions someone like George Jackson had to face compared to Angela Davis. It's not necessarily a knock on it. It's just like, let's not lie about what it is. She says, now they sell our movements back to us, right? Like, that's what she was saying. Like, they sell it to you as simulacra. So I think we just need to be clear on that. And I think that's what, debunking myths hopefully helps do. I don't think it's the totality of it, but that's hopefully what it helps do.
Well, yeah, this next quote kind of makes me smile because we always like to talk about the black middle class, the black bourgeoisie. But when she said, if you show more peerage, with wealthy conservatives and progressives than you do to working class, stand down. If you accumulate hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions and nobody knows how, stand down. If you keep saying I earn my money and do car commercials, stand down. Nobody in the sector is poor. If you have to have limits on accumulation. Whatever you do to accumulate, do not discipline the radicals. And I love that quote. It just makes me smile because, you know, a lot of times people who consider themselves Black leadership, you know, they tend to de-radicalize the movements and try to stabilize the structure that, you know, Jordan James was talking about.
Because they like, I think she says if you, I don't know where I wrote that down at, but she says if you are, basically she says these people are protected by the structure. If you work for the structure, you're protected by the structure. And the higher you get in the structure, the more you're protected by it. And again, she works in the very same structure, so she's not making a critique absent of herself. Yes. She says she's a librarian. Like, I'm not a revolutionary, but it's to say, like, if you are in these structures, then you just need to be honest about the contradictions of and stop trying to like sell it as something else. And I think that's to kind of just close it out. I think that's just the general point with a lot of that is like everybody wants to be seen, especially nowadays, because it's cool. It gets you money. It gets you points. Everybody wants to be seen as this revolutionary without ever having to actually pay for any of that shit. Like, having to actually deal with the consequences of it. But you want to be seen as that. And I would say if you ain't ready for that, because again, that's something that everybody just not serious about. We talked about what George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson did. If you ain't ready to do that, so it's fine. Just say what you are, though. But don't try to say you're them. You know, as a way to get a book deal.
Say that you not them.
Yeah.
That you can do something better when you actually can't.
Yeah.
Because if I see anybody in a "I'm not my ancestors" shirt next year, we just gonna have to line it up because that's insane.
Yeah.
I'm actually happy. I haven't seen a lot of that "I'm not my ancestors" shit, and I'm happy I've seen a lot less of it.
Well, it was getting dragged. It was getting dragged pretty bad. So
yeah, because
and we threw our hat in the ring with that one too. But yeah, that was I have no tolerance for that. If anybody goes back and listens to the episode, I have no tolerance for that. But
I get because for a while I got where I got where it came from. They were like, yeah, we not our ancestors, we not doing this, we not doing that. But you know, doing the podcast and of course just me thinking on my own, I'm like, bro, I want to be like my ancestors.
Exactly.
I think all four of these were good choices. I mean, we could have chose anything, but I think these were four good choices. You know, and as you can hear or see, you know, this touches us beyond just the the facts. You know, like this does have like real life connections to us. So yeah, I think coming up in this next year, we don't have all the myths figured out, but we are going to talk about ancestry tests. We got one on Ethiopia. Somebody actually hit me up about doing that again, so I kind of it helped remind me to do it. And then we got one on crack babies. We got one on I don't even remember everything.
I'm excited for that one because I'm learning a lot for that.
Yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
And we'll have more as well. You know, the myths are unfortunately endless. So there's always something. You know, there's always something else to talk about. I mean, you know, whenever we feel like we've covered enough myths, we don't need to keep doing the show. Maybe we do something else. But you know, there's clearly a lot to go over and analyze. So you know, I appreciate y'all for coming through over the years. Over the year, I know, you know, we're not always on the same episodes and we split up and, you know, we gotta do what we gotta do. But I do want to say on air that I appreciate my crew. You know, it's great working with y'all. I think we provide a good balance of just, you know, everyday people, you know, who none of us have degrees in this shit. Some of us didn't even finish our degrees. You know, so it's just like, you know, none of us are experts by any stretch, you know, but we work hard to try to stay on top of the information.
And I feel like they could have guessed that one.
Literally never known until you added yourself. Nobody would have known.
What'd you say, Terrell? I messed up. What?
He said, "I feel like they could guess that one." But
Like who didn't finish? Like I don't give a fuck. I got sick. What you want me to do?
Oh God. But yeah. So yeah. If anyone has any decent suggestions, if you have a myth, I would say, like, you have a myth you want to suggest, I would say go listen to the episode clarifying our method, so you have some sense of what the method is. And if you have a myth, you don't have to lay it all out for us. We can like synchronize it or synthesize it, I should say. But email us at blackmyths.pod@gmail if you really have a myth you're interested in discussing. We will vet anything that gets sent. So
better word. That's a better word.
We'll vet anything that gets sent. You know what I mean? So we'll make sure that it gets analyzed. Like I said, we have a process of doing that. So if you want to send us something, that's fine. But just know that if it doesn't meet the criteria, it may not make the show. But we don't think all the four of us know every myth out there. So we are open to other suggestions beyond ourselves. If you have something to offer. But for the people that be like, y'all need to talk about why black people are the original Jews, like, we're not having this conversation. Like, we're not doing it. Have fun. Go start another podcast. Like, we're not having those. We're just not doing it. These things don't really.
Please, hey, start that podcast. I'll listen to it.
I won't. But I'm just saying, like,
we're not going to discuss it here.
But yeah, we're not doing it. Or somebody, I think, said to me, like, y'all need to talk about why the N-word isn't a term of endearment. Clearly, people on this show shouldn't be having that discussion. But yeah, so thank you, everybody. Peace out. Thanks for being with us throughout the year. If you've been on, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Fresh out the plane in a whole nother state. I'm trying to eat down a whole nother plate. Seem like my homies was stuck in the hood. I just told them be safe in the state.